Day 628 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 312,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 800 in the past 24 hours. Then as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 6 APVs and 10 artillery. Now we'll head across to the map and start out in the Donbass, as the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade has shared some recent footage, putting on display the fate of mechanized units, Russian mechanized units for that matter, near Avdiivka, as they performed some spectacular clearing operations on abandoned Russian armor. All with the use of FPV drones, and what a mighty cook-off that abandoned Russian T-72 tank turned out to be. And then specifically as for changes on the map today in this region, so near Pervomiaska, the AFU reportedly pushed back Russians near the pond area to previous positions. Then east of Steptova, so this is in the northern flank, so here we go. Russians again tried to attack the settlement and set foot in the outer part of the village, but had to retreat later to previous positions. And at this point, Steptova has faced intense shelling recently, causing significant damage to its buildings. And this is happening in the recent past, so this indicated that Russian forces might attempt to advance there, which indeed happened later in the week, before they were largely pushed out again. However, as it pertains to strategy, so defending a place reduced to rubble is challenging, so capturing Steptova might not provide an effective foothold for the Russian army to push further forward into Berdichi. And then speaking of attempted advancements by the Russian forces, take a look at the weather for this location, which will present some pretty severe logistical challenges for any advancing force due to the increased wet and muddy conditions. But also note here, Ukrainian forces are stationed just beyond the railway line and more are keeping a watchful eye on Russia's narrow logistical supply line here at its northern flank, which can't be more than a couple of miles wide. Let's have a look there. Okay, 3.4 kilometers. So yeah, almost exactly the 2 miles. All as Ukraine continues to target Russia's backline logistical routes to serve as an impediment for any of their forward movements. But overall, for the Avdiivka front, Russia's strategy appears to be a show of force with a significant reserve assembly aiming to perform a breakthrough. And this strategy, while determined, comes with a significant cost in Russian manpower and hardware resources. But clearly for Putin, taking Ukraine, or at least the Donbass, is so much more important for him than for the well-being of his own people, who he sends into the attritional meat grinder without so much as batting an eyelid. Then moving way away across on the map to Kherson, so let's see. So the Kherson Oblast Regional Library got shelled and significantly damaged. Now fortunately there were no casualties or even injuries, and this attack was reportedly carried out by an air-launched missile from a Russian Su-35 fighter jet. But take a look at these tiny little civilian entrances. You see, time and time again, I've seen Russian forces seek out a large building, be it a warehouse or in this case a library, and with no further intel, they consider it to be a makeshift Ukrainian army base, then proceed to strike at it. And so after all this time, situations like these continue to showcase Russia's ineffective use of its own resources. Which in fact reminds me of a Russian VDV commander on Russian state media TV about 6 months ago, in something of an embarrassing freeze frame, as the Russian commander stated that Ukrainian resources were superior to theirs, and their main resource is intelligence. Also today, Ukrainian artillery spotted and fired at a Russian convoy of 11 vehicles, which was more than 22 kilometers, or about 14 miles, from the front lines, as AFU reconnaissance drones spotted the formation and proceeded to destroy through relaying the coordinates back to artillerists of at least 3 vehicles, which is pretty impressive in terms of artillery fire accuracy, which is in fact something that the Ukrainian forces are getting quite well known for now. Now, I'd like to mention at this point, as for a quick backstory to this region, as the Russian 810th Marine Brigade was moved into Kherson a few months ago and done so to stop the Ukrainian forces from crossing the river, particularly as they're trying to block the Ukrainian Marines and Special Forces without tanks, artillery, or air support. As a result, it didn't go to plan, as numerous reports, even from the Russian side, now suggest that the 810th lost approximately 70 to 80% of its troops over the space of the last 3 months. And where it gets even more interesting now is how the Russian Marines of the 810th Brigade are reporting they are outnumbered by at least 3 to 1 by Ukrainian forces in the area of Krinky, where Ukrainian troops are pushing south into the forest line. And this Russian brigade also state that they're encountering fierce resistance and dense Ukrainian fire from artillery, tanks and drones, and even small arms at this point now. Then, as for in the last day for this region, the AFU have destroyed their third rare Russian electronic warfare system, the RB-636, also known as the Svetku. And this is significant as we're starting to hear more and more from the Russian side about their gripes on having no countermeasures for Ukrainian drones. And a situation like this has only made it worse. Plus, systems like these easily run into the millions of dollars, and obviously Russia doesn't have an infinite supply. They can't just quickly replace these platforms in the same way that they do for, say, a Buhanka Scooby-Doo van. Then we'll head across to some news for today. Starting out, Germany's Defense Ministry announced new defense policy guidelines, which is the first major update in over a decade. Now, the 19-page document details the policy shift initiated by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, effectively redefining the role of the Bundeswehr, or the Russian army. And some of the policies include increased defense spending, with Germany establishing a 100 billion euros fund for modernizing its military, but also to show commitment to reach its NATO defense spending target of 2% of its annual GDP. Also, the new policy emphasizes focusing on the German army forces as on their primary task of defending Germany and its allies, including being quote-unquote ready to fight a war. Also, somewhat importantly, there was an acknowledgement of past neglect from Germany, militarily speaking, but it went on to state that Germany aims to be the backbone of Europe's collective defense, and now recognizing its position as the most populous and economically powerful country in Central Europe. And that's right. And I've mentioned this before, being that sooner or later, Germany was always going to have to step up to the plate and take the military leadership role in Europe as a means of ensuring collective defense and military strength for Europe. Then in some more Scholz news, German Chancellor Sir Olaf announced yesterday that he would engage in dialogue with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, but the condition, troop withdrawal from Ukraine. And so based on that condition, I do in fact doubt that meeting will even take place. Then in some other news, people in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro were protesting recently, but not so that they could get themselves annexed into Russia. No, quite the opposite really. As they were protesting against expenditure on pavements and sports fields, because instead they want that money to specifically go to the armed forces of Ukraine, with many signs here saying things like don't spend money on pavements, spend money on drones for the AFU. And most will realise that there is a difference between local and state budgets, but even so, if there was an existential threat to my own country or your country, we'd probably both be in this protest as well, or one just like it. Well, I know I would be. I don't want a cultural centre. I need the Russian scourge out of my country. Then in some other news, reports of more Western planes in Russia needing to perform emergency land-ins. This time it was a Boeing 737 coming from Sochi and needing to perform an emergency landing in Russia's north due to a technical malfunction with the wing flaps, which naturally service the critical function of assisting with, for takeoff, landing, lift, and maneuverability. Now, firstly, I'll mention the plan managed to land safely. Everybody is okay. But I've got to say, Russia, just stop. Stop flying these Western aircraft for which you no longer have access to spare parts for. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. And then don't go ahead and blame the West when a tragedy actually does occur. And so regarding maintenance for Western jets, airliners, planes, all sorts of things, Russia seems to be taking a twofold approach to this right now. First of all, cannibalizing their existing fleet, or passenger airline fleets, which are actually on lease, largely, and were never returned to their owners. But also what they're seeming to do is use unofficial third-party Chinese parts for maintenance and replacement, due to being locked out of purchasing genuine parts due to sanctions. But I do also find a larger irony here of how Russia really seemed to rely on not just Western components, but Western platforms in their entirety. Then moving across to a quick Russian military mobilization blunder segment. So for this quick one, a service member of the Russian forces who was wounded and lucky enough to evac and get treatment spoke of the situation on the ground regarding the quote-unquote one-way use for Storm Z units, which are the frontline Russian assault battalions. And he spoke about the terrible conditions faced by him and his comrades for these types of units. And specifically, he mentioned that these units behind the scenes are called quote-unquote disposable, and that men are spent quickly and mercilessly from these groups. So once again, just compassionless and zero value for human life that's built into a systemically flawed and corrupt Russian military system. Then we'll move across to some funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So, oh boy, another Russian mention of a tactical regrouping. So here we go again. So multiple Russian state media outlets published news earlier today, quoting the Russian Defense Ministry with the news as follows, and I'll read this one out. So it says, having assessed the situation, the command of the Dnipro group decided to move its troops to more favorable positions east of the Dnipro. The Russian Defense Ministry said, after the regrouping, the group will release some of its forces which will be used for offensive operations in other directions, the ministry said. Now, after various Russian outlets releasing this updated news, about an hour later, just an hour later, all the Russian state media outlets like RIA, TASS, and RBC had quickly deleted the news. So the Russian Ministry of Defense has got some explaining to do. And I mean, this is Kherson, so it's hard to imagine more favorable positions from behind the river. But here's the real kicker. It was almost exactly a year ago to the day when Russian forces left the north bank of the Dnipro River to quote-unquote regroup to more favorable positions. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if the Russian MOD is just so hopelessly working off pre-written scripts and that they accidentally bulk emailed Russian state media a copy-paste of the second week update from November 2022. What a bunch of clowns. Then as for a final funny to round it all off for today, guys, and in another segment of Russia is a Chinese province, here we see some recent footage of Russian police learning Chinese in such a comedic looking way. All as Russia decided a short while ago to mandate a bunch of Chinese language assimilation laws for Russians. Which means, so Russia has gone from, we'll take Kyiv in 3 days and let's protect our Russian speakers and our Russian ethnic minorities in Ukraine, all the way to something like, let's enforce learning the language of our soon-to-be Chinese overlords. Oh, the irony. So that's another video today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. So I'm usually hanging around there to at least give you a thumbs up or a heart, one of those heart things. And thanks again for all of your support. Not sure if I'm in tomorrow, but certainly the day after. And so I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.